Hi, this is the story of how State of Daniel somehow wriggles into a position whereby he seeks to disprove a logical point made by a rhetorical device by showing that the purposely absurd premise of that device is in fact absurd.
I think it's extremely sad that there's a mock atheist cult that feels the need to parody religion just to make a statement about the existence of God.
Unfortunately, the calm, rational stuff doesn't always get through, does it, Daniel? And the reality is that mockery and satire has long been a useful and sensible and enjoyable tool for holding up the mirror to things which are absurd. Whilst we're at it, whilst we're paused, don't think we didn't spot your disingenuous slipping of the word cult into that section. Totally inappropriate, unnecessary.
Actually, it's quite possible to prove the non-existence of the flying spaghetti monster and invisible pink unicorn. The flying spaghetti monster was invented by Bobby Henderson in 2005 in a satirical letter to protest the Kansas State Board of Education's decision to teach creationism alongside science.
Yes, we know, but technically speaking, that doesn't actually prove it to be wrong. It's very good evidence for it being wrong and for it not being true, but it's not absolute 100% proof, which is the whole point of the rhetorical device that is the spaghetti monster and similar ideas. But even if it were absolute proof, that wouldn't actually score you any points, Daniel. It's a rhetorical device, that's what it is. It is supposed to hold the mirror up to the absurdity of similarly held beliefs, or beliefs that are flawed in similar ways. It is not supposed to be perfectly true, and getting close to proving that it is not true, which we all accept, doesn't even begin to get you over the hurdles that you're trying to jump. The whole point of the spaghetti monster as a rhetorical device is to show how absurd it is to rely on the argument that, hey look, you can't prove it's wrong, as proof of anything whatsoever.
His argument was that his belief in the flying spaghetti monster was just as valid as creationism and should be taught in school. The fact that we know that Henderson created the flying spaghetti monster should, in any rational person's mind, completely neutralize it as a parody against religion.
No, it's a rhetorical device and it's supposed to be absurd. That's the whole point.
These arguments by new atheists fail because they only present ridiculous arguments and completely ignore non-ridiculous ones.
Well, that's plainly complete shite. There are countless detailed, careful, scholarly addresses of all manner of theological arguments and nonsense. That is not the purpose of the rhetorical device that you are talking about. The purpose of that device is to hold a simple, clear mirror up to the absurdity of your position.
If you were to replace the flying spaghetti monster or invisible pink unicorn with something more probable, then the satirical argument would lose its bite because it fails to prove anything.
No, it wouldn't, because it's not supposed to prove anything. It's supposed to demonstrate a flaw in a logical proposition.
It's just a circular argument. It begins with something that's intrinsically improbable, and then draws the conclusion that belief in such a thing is irrational. Well, duh, we already know that. We know it's silly to believe in irrational things.
And here we have the classic State of Daniel swerve. Take one point, subtly restate it, and then conclude something which doesn't naturally follow. The point of the rhetorical device in question is twofold. Firstly, as I've said, to flag the fallacy inherent in saying, "You can't prove it's not true," as a positive argument. Secondly, to force you to compare the evidence you have for something clearly absurd with the evidence you have for your personal God. If it wasn't an absurdity, it would not work.
That's why we don't believe in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or in goblins. So what the heck are atheists trying to prove with the flying spaghetti monster or invisible pink unicorn? Because their argument does nothing to address whether or not the existence of God is improbable or probable.
Well, actually it does. It talks about the level of evidence which you are prepared to accept and how thoroughly flimsy that evidence is. But even if that were not the case, it would be utterly irrelevant, because the probability or otherwise of a personal God is addressed endlessly by atheists, often in careful and scholarly fashion. You can't expect an entertaining rhetorical device to cover every single base. You know that, I'm quite sure. but you're trying to score cheap points by knocking down straw men. The straw man on this occasion is the self-evidently ridiculous idea that a fun rhetorical meme is somehow intended to be a comprehensive answer to all God claims.
The argument only disproves objects that are pretty well disproven. Okay, so I already disproved the flying spaghetti monster because I showed you its specific origin, and we know that the invisible pink unicorn is impossible because how can something be invisible and pink at the same time? Look, the easiest way to debunk these arguments is to notice that the objects that new atheists are choosing are completely arbitrary.
Actually, it seems that the easiest way to debunk these arguments in SOD's world is to purposely misconstrue them and misapply them, and then point at them and say, hey look, they don't work.
They ask us to think of the flying spaghetti monster or the invisible pink unicorn, but why not a kayaking keyboard or a floppy stemmed flower or a honey bun toad?
Why not indeed? I've got a honey bun toad right here. I'm just petting its well-evolved gills as I speak. Now, prove that I'm wrong. You can't. That's the whole fucking point.
We can create endless possibilities like these, all of which are just as probable or improbable as the next. This means that if you want to claim that just one of them is true, then we have an equal case for claiming that all of them are true. From this reasoning alone, we know that none of them is probable at all. However, while you can replace the flying spaghetti monster and the invisible pink unicorn for other things, you can't do the same thing for the concept of God.
It's that swerve again. The spaghetti monster is not intended to be an overarching answer to all God claims.
For example, God is omnipresent.
And so is my honey bun toad. Prove me wrong. That's the whole point, yet again. We can have all sorts of discussions about the validity of God claims, but the purpose of the spaghetti monster meme is to demonstrate the fallacy in the "you can't prove it doesn't exist" argument. We can see through this stuff, Daniel. You've taken the meme, sought to apply it where it was never intended to fit. Then you stand back and say, hey look, it doesn't work. God won, atheists nil. It's like taking a screwdriver to a nut, failing to get anywhere, and then saying screwdrivers are no good, and anyone who believes they work is wrong.
Well, we know that the flying spaghetti monster is a physical thing. It's in one location at one time. How can it be everywhere at once?
Oh yes he can, he projects himself in multiple locations at once. Prove me wrong. Getting this yet?
So you can't replace the two. As an alleged entity of any religion, God doesn't have the same arbitrariness that defines the flying spaghetti monster. Plus, we also know that only intelligent beings can create spaghetti and meatballs. So there's no way that the flying spaghetti monster can even exist outside of our domain. So flop goes the spaghetti monster. But those are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. I'm also going to link to a Facebook page called the Freedom from Atheism Foundation.
Thanks for the link. I'm very much looking forward to going over there and seeing what sort of nonsense we can find and debunk.
Which is a great page for apologetics, and I think a lot of you guys might be interested in it. It's a great place for news, and they post a lot of compelling arguments, so I hope you take the time to check it out.
Okay, let's sum up. What you've done here, Daniel, is taken a rhetorical device which works purely because it's absurd and said, hey look, it's absurd, therefore it's no good. As arguments go, it's phenomenally stupid. And as I've said before, Daniel appears to be a bright and educated fellow. I really struggle to believe that he doesn't know what he's doing here, and I'll leave the viewers to ponder whether these arguments are just silly or willfully misleading.